All right, everybody. I'm glad to have you with me here on the podcast. And those of you that are watching via YouTube, appreciate your attention today. Today I have a fantastic guest, Mr. Terry Weaver. Mr. Terry Weaver, first time on the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Man, I didn't know this was a YouTube thing. I might have dressed up a little more.
Well, listen. This is like the every week YouTube attire. Our audience, youth workers right now, are still in there. Look, at the very least, and you're not in your pajamas. At least you don't know if I'm in my pajamas or not.
I'm not in my pajamas from the waist up. Let's
right.
be real.
Well,
I'm wearing full disclosure. I'm wearing not to match the shirt or anything, but I am wearing my Star Wars dorm pants. Because during this season, everybody could use a good elastic waist.
Absolutely, there's no question. And I'm not as daring as, let's say, John Krasinski on his more good, some good news show that he does, and he gets up and leaves, and you don't know what he's wearing, and so there'll be none of that going on. So YouTube, be thankful for that. That you're not going to see any of that. But I have Terry on today. Terry is an author. He's a speaker. He's a coach. He does a lot of things, and I thought he was the perfect person to talk about this. Terry, you've worked in all facets. You've worked with entrepreneurs. You've worked with youth pastors. You've worked with churches. Tell us a little bit about kind of your history with youth ministry.
Man, I've been doing youth ministry since I was a youth myself. I had a church upbringing. I grew up in a pretty conservative church, but that really believed in leadership at a young age. And they knew that I had a gift for communication. So pretty much at like 14, our church had this was back in the day, in the early 90s, we had a huge bus ministry. And so our church was bringing over 1,000 kids to church every Sunday.
Wow.
I grew up in the DC area. So we were bringing kids out of Arlington and Alexandria and all over the, the greater DC area.
Yeah.
And we were bringing them to church. So, there was about 200 teenagers that came out of that, and then about 700 or 800 young people, some kids ministry. So I rotated pretty regularly at 13 between speaking to the two of them. And so, people always like, how do you become a good communicator? Well, at 13, when you're not good at anything, right? But I think all of us get to do the things we get to do because somebody believed in us along the way. Somebody like saw our spark and threw gasoline on it.
Yeah.
And, we're all grateful for those people in life. And, I think even as we're thinking about this season right now, we need to be looking for the people that are next. We need to be looking for the people that are going to, as I look over kind of the culture of youth ministry, and, I'm probably the least active in student ministry that I've been in any season of my life.
Yeah.
But although I'm deeply involved with tons of youth pastors, not even really intentionally, just because they're people I've known. And I started speaking professionally to teenagers right at 18 on a pretty regular basis. I started doing the old D-Now circuit.
Sure.
In college right away. And I did a D-Now, and I was like, I remember going to my first one to speak, and I was like, can somebody tell me what a D-Now is?
So I'm just showing up to speak. I don't even know what this event is.
Right. Like, I had never heard that. And if you're like a Church of God person or Assemblies of God person, you're probably listening going, I don't know what that is. And
yeah,
if you're a Southern Baptist, man, you've got the T-shirt to prove that you've been to a D-Now before.
That's right.
It's kind of like a poor man's way of doing a camp, which actually, when you think about a model that may be effective, smaller groups and homes may be, one of the ways that we're able to pivot and serve. This is a scary season. I spent much of my life making the majority of my income on the 10 weeks of the summer when I would go speak at camps.
Yeah.
And so, I know that's a big part of your ministry, man. And so, this is just a really weird time. It's a really weird time in our world. And so, man, I've done it all from school assemblies to, and kind of how I pivoted into the life that I have now. as I'd find myself, showing up to speak for Billy Bob, the youth pastor of 17th Baptist Church of Ferndale, Arkansas, or wherever,
Shout
and
out to Ferndale.
I'm just making up a city, but I know I've been there, right?
Sure,
And
absolutely right.
and
Many Ferndales.
I have been to a 17th Baptist church before. Yeah, because First was taken.
First,
And
yes.
And we have a bank here in Nashville called Fifth Third. I kind of wish there was like Fifth Third Baptist Church. Man, like I found myself spending so much of my time with the youth pastor and really like mentoring him and trying to help him. A lot of times trying to talk him out of quitting the job that he was in because his pastor was a jerk,
right?
Or he was underpaid and he wasn't able to provide for his family.
Yep.
And he was, mentally unwell because of the weight of student ministry. And I think, one of the things that seasons like we're in right now, you're going to see a lot of this across a lot of things, is nothing new is really happening right now.
Yeah. There's not right. The circumstances are different, but the process isn't new. But I think what you said earlier was interesting, is that when you were younger, you had leaders thinking about who was next, right? And what's next. And I think that's such an important quality. I think there's a lot of youth workers listening and watching who are asking what's next, and maybe they should be asking who's next.
Right.
They should be asking maybe who in my youth ministry, who in my leadership, because it is next in what is next, right? It's maybe who before what. It's like what is being revealed during this time that is starting to stir the waters in ministry. Mm-hmm. Because I those of you that are asking the question, I know there's many of you that are asking, I just can't wait to get back to normal. And my heart for youth ministry and church is, my Lord, please don't go back to normal. Please, whatever normal was, let's not. I mean, look, I understand the first week, but hopefully whatever is happening right now in your church and your youth ministry has revealed some things, not just about program, but has revealed something about your own heart as to how you reach out to students and how you do ministry, and all those things has revealed something. Not about what, but about who, about yourself and about people you serve. Terry, what are your thoughts on that, in the sense of, talk about pivoting, right? Because you have to, we pivoted from this season, we pivoted from face-to-face to Zoom to Facebook's live to much more social media to all those things. What are you sensing, even in the communities you serve, both the church and entrepreneurs and things like that? Where do you, what can our listeners and our viewers take away in the sense of pivoting and saying, I don't know, there's a lot of questions like, I don't know which way to pivot, or where is this leading, or can we just get our first youth meeting under our belt? I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, and some are just lost in the weeds and have no idea what everything looks like, and nobody does, I don't think, has a clear picture of that. But what would you recommend to people who are in that boat that says, I don't know, I just don't know, I don't know which way I'm going?
I don't know. It's just, I think there's been a storm coming for a while.
Yeah.
Into the church of, I'm talking a little bit of my business hat, but it really applies to that question that you asked at the beginning, that you go like, who's next? Is when you look at like anything that you want to see continue, you've got to look at like future talent. You've got to look at like, who's going to take this over when we're done?
Yeah.
Like, because getting through this season as a leader, if you're listening and that's your gig, man, and you're a youth pastor and you've got students that you report to, and you've got an elder board that you report to and a pastor that you report to, and you're going to be called into budget meetings and deal with things that are, it may not be above your pay grade, but they're definitely not on your list of things that you're really passionate about. I don't think there's anybody that wants to sit through a budget meeting.
No.
But,
especially if it's about your budget.
Yes, it's
right
about
now.
Your budget. And most churches are Most youth ministry, when I've been asked to do consulting and, like, help us hire a youth pastor. And they're always like, well, I've got, we've got X. And a lot of times it's, there's a lot of times that they're offering the youth pastor a livable wage,
Yeah.
which is where I start. But then they're like, well, we have like 100 kids and we've got $9,000 in the youth budget. I'm like, yeah, that's not gonna, that's not gonna. And I guess my like the thing I'm always I'm asking, and I know you well, man, and I know your passions, is I want to know that two things are going on in student ministry. And I think maybe these are the things we should be asking ourselves. Is that idea, are we making him known? And are we giving a place for kids to come to know him?
Yeah.
Is, the two things that I think the church is here for. We're here to make disciples and to invite people who are outside the church.
Yeah.
But man, we talk about pivot and who's next. Who knows what the culture of student ministry is going to look like? Are we going to go back to meeting in person? Gosh, I hope so.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, let's all meet on aisle 7 at Walmart. It's okay to meet there. So
is that where the toilet paper is?
If that's yeah, there's plenty of room there, right? I was at Sam's yesterday, and that whole area is clear. You could definitely, yeah, you could do an all of youth group in the toilet paper section at Sam's. I think we spend far too little time developing leaders, and as states begin to open, you can meet at coffee houses. Some states, depending on your state, you can meet on the front porch at Starbucks and sit 6 feet and yell at each other, but you can still pour into leaders and raise up the next generation of youth workers and of student leaders. And if you're listening to this show or watching us on YouTube, at some point, God broke your heart for something.
Yeah.
And, I remember in Atlanta, 1996, Promise Keepers were all happening there.
Right.
And my friend Joel Reynolds, who I mentioned, actually, he's a chaplain in the Army. He's in Iraq right now. We went down for there, but I'll never forget Dr. Tony Evans' message.
Yeah.
And he spoke about the burning bush and about how God brings us to places to get recalled. And, I think now's a good season to evaluate your calling and ask what that is. And, something I've learned that I didn't really believe was possible. I had a hard time fitting at my theology as a trained evangelist, or someone who that was their gig. That God doesn't need an altar call to do His work.
Right.
I've seen Him move in mentoring meetings and at conferences and over long haul relationships. And I think one of the things that I think is going to be the future trend in student ministry is so much of youth ministry from, the days of Yaconelli even, and through now, has been about quick. It's been, we've wanted to see fast things happen. That was how we gauged our success. We had 7 kids come to know Christ, or we had this happen.
Yeah.
And it was always about in the moment data, but life change is the metamorphosis is a slow process.
Yes.
Yeah,
I love the metrics of saying, oh, okay, we can report now because to our pastors, whoever, and says, hey, we had 5 people receive Christ and come to the altar. It was very physical. It was very demonstrative. And the metrics, and my hope is for those that are listening and watching, is saying, look, what are the new metrics? What are the new metrics of saying where we're seeing growth? Where are we seeing kids come to Christ? And it may not. It's obviously not a thing where you're doing an altar call and people coming forward, and everything's a small group at this point. Unless you have some 1,000 kids on Zoom or whatever you may be doing. But you make such a great point there of looking at the new measurements.
I said, I can't imagine 1,000 kids on Zoom being a good idea.
No, it's probably not. I'm sure there are people trying to achieve that, but a lot of the effective ministry that's going on now is, you have, and what I'm hearing too from youth pastors is that, as easy as it is to click on a link and be a part of a Zoom, kids still find excuses not to show up for that. So it's not ease of coming to the meeting, right? That's the hope is that that students and youth pastors and youth workers are reevaluating, and saying, look, we can make excuses for a kid who says, well, they have homework and they can't go out and they don't drive. Well, listen, if they're not showing up for your Zoom meeting, that reveals a whole nother thing. If they can't click the button to be a part of the meeting, to be a part of growth, then you have to say, well, what is required then? How do I, and that's part of, I just talked with a youth worker who I'm coaching and says, look, you need to go ahead and challenge your students beyond, you could do student leaders. You used to be able to say, hey, listen, I need you to help facilitate the program tonight, right? There's 10 things I need you to do. Now you can still do that in Zoom and things like that. Well, you're going to read a scripture and you're going to do a thing, whatever you're going to do. But what I'm also saying, and what I told this youth worker says, look, you need to challenge these kids, especially your leadership team, to lead beyond the program, to say, look, I'm not asking you, this isn't about the youth ministry. This is about you. This is about how you're growing in your individual time based on your time, gifts, and talents. And you're growing beyond the youth program, that the youth program is no longer the facilitator of giving you a task. This is about the process of you taking what you have and what you know and expressing it to the world, whether that's through art, whether that's through, making graphics every day on Instagram, whether that's doing a live video where you're leading worship on your guitar and you're not just leading worship for youth group, you're embodying the things that we've taught you to release to your peers. It's not just about facilitation of the program, it's about facilitation of your faith in all your many platforms, whatever platform you choose to do that on. And so I've been encouraging them to have 5-day challenges, right? Short incremental challenge pieces where they say, listen, student leaders, I need you for the next 5 days to do this, because this isn't about the program. This is about preparing yourself for the world and for your own faith. And yes, at some point we're going to get back together and we want to see you grow through this time so that you don't come back into the youth ministry or into the general meeting the way you left it. From that day that we did not have youth group anymore to now, are you the same person? What are you valuing right now? And the goal is that you grow during this time versus waiting for something to get back to normal. And I think maybe that's where youth workers need to focus and concentrate on that who's next principle, because I think that's going to reveal something when you do get back, that if your youth group is the same as when you got back, then there was no growth and there was no challenge and there was no introspective or challenges to live beyond the group, which is what every youth worker challenges kids to do, to live out your faith every day. So I hope that's the case. I hope the new metrics, I hope there's new measurements. I hope there's those kinds of new things.
Yeah, I'm probably going to hurt some feelings, but I'm going to say it.
Say it.
One of the conversations I've had with a lot of pastor friends is the promise in Scripture says that the gates of hell will not prevail against my church.
Yeah.
And that's a promise that a lot of us in the ministry world have hung on to. But in reality, I think what a lot of us are kind of learning is that the gates of hell might prevail against your entertainment venue.
Yes.
The gates of hell might prevail against your program that you put on.
Yep.
The gates of hell are going to prevail against your job as a social director for adolescents.
Yep. That's right.
And I think a lot of churches are realizing that the metrics that they have been judged, their leaders have been judged on, is that's what they have been set up to do. And in reality, you aren't leading a student ministry. You are fulfilling a calendar commitment. Even though we have a lot of technological tools right now, and now's the time to get super basic and super gritty. Like the things there's a tendency to want to try something that's new, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times this is when you just go back to like old school 101, like, as Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun.
That's right.
You know, like, and I get it. We all want to be innovative, but now's the time to use the tools. It's been interesting. I've been watching how churches have reacted to this, and Stephen Furtick at Elevation Church and their program. The one pivot they made was to virtual children's programming.
Yeah.
But they were ready for that because that was something they were trying to figure out already.
Yep.
And a lot of churches have kind of excuse the analogy, but they've been caught with their pants down in this season.
Yes.
They weren't ready.
No.
They weren't ready
Nope.
to serve and to lead.
Right.
Our homes we're taking ownership in faith again, right?
Right.
There's a lot of parents that have worshiped with their kids for the first time in a long time. And they've had to have, because you're not there and you literally can't be there. Right. The parents have taken responsibility for the spiritual stewardship of their families again.
Praise God.
And for so long in student ministry, we've carried that for them.
Yep.
Almost to the detriment of their growth. Go look to see where your college kids from 4 years ago what are they doing now?
Yep.
Yeah. And like everybody, like us in youth ministry and even kids ministry, like we bear that responsibility. Like we've created that culture.
Yep.
That's the beast we've created. And now's a time to really get super relational. And you mentioned something earlier about how do you handle this and how do you judge the matrix? I remember the first thing I did when I was in student ministry was, besides calling every guy that I could find in the phone book and just getting their advice, and I remember asking Young Life the first time I said, it's about earning the right to be heard. It's about earning the right to be heard in the lives of students. And a lot of us have never had to do that with students. Yeah. Their parents just make them show up Wednesday at 7 because you live in sweet tea country. And that's what you do on Wednesday or Sunday, or if your church was like my church growing up, that's what you do on Wednesday, Sunday, Saturday for visitation.
Yeah.
And for the first time in a long time in America, the church has left the building. This is going to be a season that I'm in the middle of writing an article for a publication right now. And I've just been looking throughout history about how every time that we've had something like this, how massive growth and opportunity has come out of it every time.
Yeah.
Whether it's out of the plague, how the Renaissance came about, whether it's how out of the Great Depression, innovation happened in our country, or I was just watching one of my favorite docu-series is The Men Who Built America. And it's about the Vanderbilts. I was just rewatching that today. And I was, rewatching how, Vanderbilt built his whole thing out of the ashes of the Civil War. And, I'm in no means saying that we should exploit bad things. But what I am saying is out of bad things can come amazing things. We've seen that all through Scripture. Yeah. The idea that God meant it for good. And that, I think, is what youth workers ought to be about more than anything. It's about being the hands and feet of God meant it for good. That we are the healing balm in Gilead. We are the ones that are on the front lines bringing hope. And, what does success look like in ministry? Your friend and my friend John Rogers is a youth pastor in the great city of Madisonville, Alabama.
Shout out Madisonville.
Yeah, the home of the Trash Pandas.
That's right.
The world-renowned Trash Pandas. I watched him going. He has students and youth, or kid children and student ministry, and he went around. He had signs printed, just letting kids know they were loved and they mattered. And I think, we're in a culture right now where there's a lot of people have been told the work they do isn't essential.
Yeah.
And I think now more than ever, student ministry is one of the most essential frontline works on the planet. You have a lot of seniors right now.
Yep.
That have lost the moments that all of us talk about from high school 20 years from now, or 20 years ago, or whatever it was for us.
Yep.
They've missed every one of those.
Yep.
Um, and what excites me about those kids is they're going to get something that a lot of the millennials missed out on, and that's resilience.
Yeah.
You know, they've had to do hard things. They've had to face hard things.
Yep.
They've seen bad things, and we've had an amazing, but these things happen in different ways. They've happened in my lifetime about every 10 years.
Yeah.
And 9/11, the downturn, those are the last three. And, they're all bad things, and there's bad that happens in it, but like that, that verse that, God meant it for good, that God can do good things. And I think the good things are those of us that are called to work with the young people, that we have the power to empower them and unleash them. Because I think sometimes we forget how powerful a student armed with hope really is.
Yeah.
And I think now's the time where you really, and I get it. There's a lot of frustration, and there's probably some fringe kids that you just can't connect with right now.
Right.
That's okay. Double down on your leader kids and pour into them, because they probably can.
Yeah. Yeah, you make a good point there. I mean, look, Zoom nobody's going to remember your Zoom meeting, just like they don't remember your Wednesday night per se, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to remember. People are going to remember John Rogers there in Madison, and they're going to remember that. They're going to remember somebody showing up to their door and leaving a sign in their yard. They're going to remember the youth workers now that are doing graduation services. They're going to in front of kids' houses and putting on a graduation service.
Yep.
6 feet away.
They're going to remember that.
10 feet away. They're putting on graduation things. And youth workers, let me encourage you with this, but also challenge you. Listen, you're not graded on how well your Zoom meeting is going, okay? The metrics there have not changed. The true biblical metric is, are you still making disciples? You're having to prove your value beyond the meeting, and as it always should be. By doing things, and hopefully you will not stop doing these things. You'll figure out ways to be interactive with kids and stop hyping the meeting and start doing what Terry's talking about, and investing and pouring into kids, not through a meeting, but through those relationships and those grandiose gestures that kids need us all to do at times, is to make a big deal about their lives and make a big deal about who Jesus is, and saying, look, this big Jesus, you can follow him, you can trust him, you can move forward in your life regardless of what happens, because this Jesus is so big. And Terry, I think you just brought up just a fantastic point there. I think that all flows into who's next.
Yeah, it really does. I remember Doug Fields telling a story at one of the first youth specialties I attended, which was back in 1995, to date myself a little bit. But I remember him telling a story of like a kid that missed the prom, or a kid that like missed out or had something that he couldn't go to the prom.
Yeah.
So he went and rented a U-Haul truck and decorated it up and like made a big to-do about it. And you guys have the chance to do those kind of things now. Like, and those are the things that are ridiculous. And I was reminded of that in all places at the Atlanta airport. And if you're someone that travels, Evel, you know that being laid over in Atlanta is just 1 degree separated from actual hell. Like you're always going to be stuck there for a ridiculous amount of time.
Yes, you are.
You're going to sit there eating Popeye's chicken, reconsidering your life and asking why you're doing such a thing.
Yes.
You're going to be in the I gate and realize you need to be in the Q gate in 7 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
But I remember standing there on the way to a youth camp one time, and it was one of those moments where I was like, dang it, I'm old. It was just a couple years ago, and a student was like, Terry Weaver. I'm like, oh, gosh. He's like, you came to my youth camp, and you talked about how God had called us to be like an action figure, to put faith into action, and I've never forgotten that. And he's like, I have an action figure sitting in my dorm now, like when you spoke at my middle school, and it reminds me to like put my faith into action. And I think we need to be the ones that deploy those kind of moments and memories. I think there's just such an opportunity for us to to do remarkable, crazy things, to do the things that nobody else would be ridiculous enough to do, to get dressed up in the tuxedo shirt and go pin the corsage on your girls and your senior girls, you know,
Yeah.
if you were crazy like me and willing to, when Goodwill opens, go get a large dress out of the section at Goodwill and go show up and mess with some of your boys and give
Yes.
them, pin a boutonniere on their t-shirt,
Something.
go show up and be there for those kids, because at some point later in life, they're really going to need you. And those moments and those memories are going to be the things that you're going to be able to give them as a gift right now that may have a very, very minor impact in that moment, but will pay dividends on their faith and their memory of the people that made them matter.
Those are the stories that'll be told, right? I mean,
Yes.
you talked earlier about telling stories and getting back to that. And really what we're doing is we're living the stories. We're
Yes.
creating
Yes.
the narrative. We're showing up to houses so that one day Johnny, who makes fart noises, isn't going to remember the Zoom meeting. He's going to remember the youth pastor that showed up and dropped Taco Bell off, not a sponsor, dropped Taco Bell off
Yeah.
at his front door and texted him and said, "Hey, got some bean burritos for you on the porch."
Yeah.
And that will also determine if who's next. These
Yes.
stories you're living out, youth workers, will determine not what's next, but who's next. And that's the goal. Who's next
Right.
is based on how we live the story right now.
Yeah. And it doesn't always happen in the ways that we think it should. And I know some of you are listening to this and you've probably tuned it out and went, by golly, we need to be teaching the word of God.
And we should. Let's not.
And we should. No one said we
Absolutely.
shouldn't. But I love what Bob Goff says about our faith, that we are best at our best when we leak Jesus. For yourself, man, go back and read the Gospels again and watch the moments that Jesus created for his disciples, because it was full of those kind of things. And I think that's what student pastors do better than anybody, is they help us see Jesus in a way that maybe the grown-ups in big church have missed.
Yeah.
CBS did an amazing docu mini series on Jesus. Probably I don't remember when it came out, but I have it on VHS, if that tells you anything. Because I recorded it on my VCR, like anybody should.
Yeah.
Speaking of making you sound old, but there was a scene in the moment of where they were about to go in the boat with Jesus, and he was about to call them to, he was the first boat when he was calling them to, follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. And there was this scene when Jesus was standing there with a couple of the disciples, and they were just skipping rocks and laughing. And I was like, man, if I could see Jesus that way as I read scripture again, as that Jesus that wants to build real relationships. Jesus spent 3 years with those guys. And that's a lot of times, that's what the time we have in our student ministries, because we move on and kids move on and they come and go. We have such a limited window to make such a major impact.
Yeah.
But as I talk to leaders of all kinds now on my podcast, even now, it's those youth leaders, it's the teachers, it's those people that poured into world changers that made them who they are. And, this pandemic gives us a blank canvas to create some amazing memories and some amazing moments, and to maybe remind kids that are being forced to live in kind of a grown-up world that a Jesus that loves them is still there and still sees them in a as the little kids that he designed them to be.
Well, Terry, that's a powerful thought, and I think that's I think you've summed it up, because that's how Jesus did for us, and how we also must do for others.
Yeah.
And that's what this time requires us to do,
Mm-hmm.
is to flesh out the gospel and to flesh out who Christ is by putting signs in yards, by doing graduation ceremonies, by getting beyond the Zoom meeting and all of those things. What are some final thoughts you want to give to youth workers who, once again, may find themselves pivoting, because they are asking what's next for them, maybe in this
Mm-hmm.
time and season? What do you want to talk to them about real quick and give them some encouragement even in this season?
Just because God's moving you on to something new doesn't mean he's done with you. The only way we really truly see the trajectories of our lives is when we look backwards. And in those moments where, the proverbial feces hits the fan, if you will,
Yes.
y- like you're not going to be able to see it then because you're literally covered in it. But looking back and the trajectory of my life and the places, it was always those kind of breaking moments and those moments where I just thought, man, this can't be it.
Yeah.
There has to be more. And I had a lot of my identity tied into that. I was a youth evangelist and that I was called by God to do that.
Yeah.
And I got to do some amazing things from, school assemblies to going to a city. And because of the school assemblies, literally giving an altar call and watching 700 kids come forward and make first time decisions for Jesus. And those are amazing things to do. And then, I know you and I have talked about this before, that I was always faced with a harsh reality of that, the discipleship never happened after I left.
Yeah.
And all I really did was created a spiritual orphanage in a city for a week. And had I known you better, I would have, and had you actually written your book on, discipleship and your curriculum around that, dude, I'd have sent that to every one of those pastors.
God bless you.
Because and I think it's just a good time. There's no better time than this. And I'm watching it through my neighborhood. I'm watching it through my mentoring relationships and my coaching relationships I have. Everyone is taking inventory. Today was trash day in my neighborhood. Everybody was throwing out stuff they don't need. Right?
Right.
There was a dresser. There's been more things in our Facebook group that have been for trade today than I've ever seen in my life. It's like, no, Karen, I don't want your bookcase. But now's a good time to take inventory of like, where do we fit in this next season?
Yeah.
And the worst thing you can do for students and the worst thing you can do for your family and your marriage, your mental health, your spiritual health, your physical health is to stay in a position where you're miserable. Now's a great time to gracefully go if you need to.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid of it. And dude, I know, man, there's a lot of, it's like the new Frozen song, Into the Unknown, man.
That's
We're
right.
all jumping into an unknown season. And, a lot of the things that people thought that was safe and guaranteed just aren't anymore. And so there's no better time to embrace that and to step into whatever the opportunity that now makes possible. And that's one of the things that I've been asking, and everybody around me, I've been encouraging them to ask is, what does this make possible? This doesn't make possible that we can gather in large meetings, but it does make Taco Bell runs for those middle school boys that love Taco Bell, or, or our Dairy Queen is reopening this week. Who wouldn't go get 99-cent blizzards and do a blizzard run for your whole,
That's right.
like, and like, I get it. You may have a curmudgeon that doesn't understand what the value of a blizzard. But there's a middle school girl who is struggling with why she's still here.
Yeah.
That your blizzard is going to interrupt her day and remind her that she's loved and she matters. And, I think we dare not get too caught up in any of this on missing what we could be seeing, because we can't see through the just, it's almost like it's called the fog of war.
Yeah.
You can't see it when you're in it. And so yeah, man, I think there's pivoting to be done all around. There's innovation to be done all around.
Yep.
Um,
And take the trash out for some
yeah,
people
yeah,
on trash day.
and some of you, it may be you. It may be time to exit stage left and to go and allow God to use you in new ways and new places. You know, if you're in a bad situation, now's a good time to get out of it. Um, there's a lot of opportunity in front of you, and if you're in a good situation, now's a great time to double down, right?
Right.
And to serve and not to hide and to show up. Um, and that's not me trying to. This is just me trying to be real,
That's right.
you know. And that's the best thing you can do in this situation. Although I got fired for it, but you know, like the truth will always set you free.
That's right.
You know, that's
From your
an
job,
old.
maybe. From your job
It may
occasionally.
set you. It may set you free from your job, but for some of you, that may be the best thing that'll ever happen to you.
I want to thank you so much for your time tonight. I want to thank you for sharing your heart, sharing your passion for youth workers. Now I'm going to steal something from Hot Ones, right? This mic, or this mic. Tell the world what you have going on in your life. How can people get in touch with you? How can people connect with you?
Yeah, everything's on terryweaver.com. All of my social media there. You can listen to my podcast. You can buy my book. You can send me a message. It's all there, man. terryweaver.com. Terry Weaver with a Y. And I'd love to connect with you if there's anything I can do to serve you or encourage you, or you just maybe need someone to talk through this. They're figuring out what's next for you. The best thing you can be right now is the hands and feet of Jesus to your students. For kids that are hurting, even though you might be hurting right now, even though you may be confused right now, just show up for your students, love them well, serve them well, let them know they matter, encourage them to lead, give them the space to lead, and that'll pay huge dividends for your student ministry in your life and in theirs.
Well, thank you, Terry. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your encouragement. And all the whether you're watching or listening, everything will be down in the show notes to his webpage and all that. So if you want to reach out to Terry, please go ahead and do so. And thank him for being a part of the show today. So that's it for today, guys. We will catch you guys in the next episode.